The summer of 1680 pressed down on Madrid like a suffocating weight. Inside the vast halls of the Alcazar, the royal palace, the air barely moved, thick with the cloying scent of lavender, rose water, and something far less pleasant. It wasn't just the heat that made courtiers subtly raise handkerchiefs to their noses or step aside when the young princess approached. Whispers followed her wherever she went. "Her Royal Highness is coming down the corridor," one lady-in-waiting would murmur to another. In a hurry, they would spritz the air with floral water. It barely helped. At just 19, Princess Margarita Teresa, daughter of King Philip IV of Spain and niece to her own mother, Mariana of Austria, carried with her an odor so overpowering it cut through even the finest perfumes of the court. Some said it resembled rotting fish mixed with damp mildew. No matter how often she bathed, no matter what rare oils or remedies were applied, the smell always returned. It was only one symptom, cruel and impossible to hide, of a deeper curse that had plagued her bloodline for generations. The House of Habsburg had long practiced marriages between close relatives, uncles and nieces, cousins, kin bound too tightly together, all in a desperate effort to preserve power and property. The cost of that obsession was now written plainly in their bodies. From across the chamber, the aging court painter, Don Diego Velázquez, watched her pass. His eyes, sharp despite the years, had witnessed the slow transformation of this royal family. He had painted them in all their ceremonial glory and seen, beneath the surface, their steady decline. Each generation bore the marks more clearly than the last. Jutting jaws, thick lips, hooked noses, and now, strange, unexplainable afflictions that even the finest physicians could not cure. He once overheard the royal doctor, Luis Marcato, call it the price of blood purity. The phrase had never left him. Years earlier, Marcato had written a warning, a treatise titled Morbis Hereditas, describing the dangers of inbreeding. But his words had been ignored. The crown had chosen legacy over caution, purity over survival, and now the consequences lingered in every corridor of the palace. Down in the kitchens, an older cook named Maria stirred a thick herbal mixture in a steaming pot. She had served 3 generations of Habsburgs and had seen enough to know the truth, even if no one dared speak it aloud. Crushing rosemary and thyme into a paste, she prepared yet another remedy for the princess. "Poor girl," she muttered under her breath. "It's not her fault she was born like this." The kitchen door slammed open. The high steward rushed in, sweat glistening on his temples. "Is it ready? Her Highness is about to receive the French ambassador." That ambassador, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Marquis de Torcy, was known for his sharp observations and even sharper reports. King Louis XIV of France was already receiving regular updates detailing the physical decline of Spain's royal family. Every weakness, every flaw, it all became leverage in the dangerous game of diplomacy. "I doubt any herb will cover that smell," a young page whispered foolishly. The crack of a slap echoed through the room. "Watch your mouth," the steward barked. "You speak of the royal blood of Spain." In her private chambers, Margarita Teresa stood motionless as her attendants dressed her for the formal audience. Tears blurred her vision, but she made no sound. They layered powder onto her pale skin, painted her lips, draped jewels across her neck, but nothing could disguise the truth. The mirror reflected it mercilessly. The Habsburg jaw, hollow eyes, skin so translucent it seemed almost unnatural. "Your Highness, the ambassador awaits," the chamberlain announced carefully from the doorway, careful not to breathe too deeply. Margarita inhaled slowly, steadying herself the way she had been taught since childhood. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and summoned the pride expected of her. "Let him in," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Elsewhere in the palace, her younger brother Carlos, only 12 years old and already heir to the Spanish throne, sat hunched over a book. His tutor tried, patiently but hopelessly, to teach him to read. Carlos struggled to form even the simplest words. His oversized tongue and malformed jaw made speech nearly impossible. His legs, weakened by rickets, caused him constant pain. Seizures came without warning, and intellectually, he lagged far behind boys his age. "Your Majesty, let's try again," the tutor urged, forcing calm into his voice. Carlos blinked slowly, staring at the page, before his gaze drifted toward the window. Outside in the palace gardens, children ran freely, sons of noblemen, strong, fast, healthy. Everything he was not. He had never joined them. He never could. His fragile body confined him to these ornate rooms, protected from even the smallest threat. A simple illness, a common cold, could kill him. And in the distance, the future of Spain rested entirely on his shoulders. In another wing of the palace, far removed from the suffocating tension of the royal chambers, King Philip IV sat in council. Age had worn him down. His once commanding presence had softened into something quieter, tired, burdened. War with France had drained Spain's treasury. Colonies in the New World were growing restless. Trade faltered, the empire trembled. But none of these troubles weighed on him as heavily as one simple, terrifying question. What would become of his bloodline? "Your Majesty must consider arranging a marriage for Prince Carlos," said the Duke of Medinaceli, the Prime Minister. "He is young, yes, but securing the succession cannot wait." Philip stroked his graying beard, his eyes distant. In his heart, he already knew the truth. His son might never father a child. The court physicians had spoken to him in private, their voices hushed with caution. Carlos likely suffered from severe developmental and hormonal conditions, what they called hypogonadism. His body, they feared, might never produce an heir, and yet, what royal house in Europe would agree to such a match? Still, the king said nothing of his doubts. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Consider the royal houses of France, Austria, and Portugal," he ordered. "Bring suitable candidates before the council." No one spoke the real reason aloud. They didn't need to. The dynasty's obsession with preserving pure blood had brought them to this point. And now, the cost of that obsession was becoming impossible to ignore. The murmurs of the council were suddenly cut short as the doors burst open. A messenger rushed in, breathless. He dropped to one knee and handed the king a sealed letter. Philip broke the wax with trembling fingers. As he read, the color drained from his face. "There's been an incident," he said, his voice unsteady. "The audience with the French ambassador, Princess Margarita Teresa, has collapsed." The room fell silent. No one was surprised. It wasn't the first time, and deep down, everyone understood what it meant. Her health was as fragile as her brother's. "Adjourn the meeting," Philip muttered, rising slowly. "I must see my daughter." As he walked through the long corridors of the Alcazar, a heavy weight pressed down on him, far heavier than any crown. Years ago, after the death of his first wife, he had made what he believed was a wise political decision. He married his niece, Mariana of Austria. It had been tradition, strategy, duty. He had never stopped to consider what it might do to their children. Now, as he watched them suffer, bodies weakened, minds dimmed, futures slipping away, guilt settled over him like iron. He hadn't just doomed his children. He may have doomed an empire. Deep within the royal library, far from the noise of the court, a single candle flickered beside a hunched figure. The royal physician turned fragile pages with trembling hands, scanning ancient texts for answers. Anything that might explain what was happening to Spain's ruling family. His eyes paused on a familiar passage from Luis Marcato's long-forgotten treatise. The repeated union of blood too close in kin produces offspring fragile in body and mind, prone to illness, deformity, and in the worst cases, incapable of reproduction. The physician exhaled slowly, closing the book. There were no cures here, only warnings, warnings that had been ignored for generations. Outside, dark clouds gathered over Madrid. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the quiet storm building within the palace walls. The scent of damp stone and fading lavender lingered in the corridors, a constant reminder of Princess Margarita Teresa, a reminder of decay, of something unraveling, and of time running out. The clock tower of the Alcazar struck noon on a cold November day in 1679. Church bells answered, echoing across Madrid as the royal procession made its way into the Cathedral of Santa Maria. This was no ordinary ceremony. This was the wedding of King Carlos II of Spain, 18 years old, king since the age of 4, to Maria Louisa of Orléans, the 17-year-old niece of King Louis XIV of France. She had arrived only a week earlier, and according to whispers in court, she had wept the moment she first saw her future husband. It was difficult to blame her. Despite the careful efforts of attendants, powder, perfumes, fine clothing, Carlos presented a heartbreaking figure, frail, emaciated, his Habsburg jaw so pronounced that his mouth could not fully close. He needed 2 aides just to remain standing. Cardinal Portocarrero presided over the ceremony, his voice steady, though tension lingered beneath it. Then came the vows. The cathedral fell into an uneasy silence. Carlos tried to speak, but the words came out strained, garbled by his oversized tongue, reduced to a soft, high-pitched murmur. The congregation held its breath. Some felt pity, others, discomfort. Near the front, an elderly noblewoman, Doña Elvira de Montoya, leaned toward her granddaughter. "Look at his hands," she whispered. The girl glanced discreetly. The king's fingers trembled as he tried to place the ring onto his bride's hand. It took effort, more than it should have. "Do you think he can have children?" the girl whispered. Doña Elvira frowned sharply at the boldness of the question, but she didn't answer. Because the truth was, everyone was thinking the same thing. The future of Spain now depended entirely on this fragile young king, and the odds were not in his favor. At the front of the cathedral, Queen Mother Mariana of Austria watched the ceremony with a carefully controlled expression. She revealed nothing, but behind her stillness was calculation. For years, she had ruled in her son's name. Even now, she had no intention of surrendering that power. Mariana herself was both a product and a defender of the Habsburg tradition, daughter of the Austrian emperor, sister to King Philip IV, wife to her own uncle. She had lived the logic of dynastic politics, and she had paid its price. Now her gaze rested on Maria Louisa, the young French bride, a Bourbon princess, a symbol of French ambition, a threat. In the back of the cathedral, Count Harrach, the imperial ambassador, observed everything closely. His sharp eyes missed nothing. Later, he would write in his report to Vienna, "The king can barely stand. His weakness is such that it is doubtful he will consummate the marriage, let alone produce an heir." The ceremony ended, and the royal procession returned to the Alcazar for the wedding feast. But Carlos was already exhausted. He had to be carried away to his chambers before the celebration could begin. There, his physicians administered yet another tonic, a bitter mixture of herbs, minerals, and animal extracts. Just one of countless remedies they had tried over the years. "His Majesty must conserve his strength," one doctor murmured. They all knew what awaited him that night. The marriage had to be consummated. In the great hall, the feast unfolded in full splendor. Long tables overflowed with roasted meats, exotic fruits, and gleaming silver dishes. Nobles, envoys, and clergy raised their glasses, offering congratulations with practiced smiles. But beneath the celebration, unease lingered. Carlos barely touched his food. His malformed jaw made chewing painful. Instead, he sipped thin broths and soft purees. From his place at the head table, the Duke of Medinaceli watched quietly, his expression tense. "Look at them," he muttered to the Constable of Castile. The foreign dignitaries, watching him like vultures. The constable nodded grimly. Everyone understood what was coming. If the king failed to produce an heir, Spain would become a prize, its vast empire divided among competing powers. France was already preparing. Louis XIV had spent years laying the groundwork. Alliances, negotiations, quiet promises. They were waiting for the moment Spain would fall. Music filled the hall as musicians began to play. Courtiers rose to dance. Carlos sat stiffly beside his new queen. Maria Luisa, though shaken, maintained her composure. She smiled gently, spoke kindly, fulfilled her role. Not far away, an aging poet, Don Francisco de Quevedo, watched the scene with sharp, knowing eyes. "Look at the king," he murmured to a younger man beside him. "Do you see it?" The young man studied Carlos, then nodded slowly. "There's sadness, and something empty." Quevedo exhaled softly. "It's the weight of a dying bloodline. No crown can shield him from that." "Do you think he understands?" the young man asked. "Enough to feel it," Quevedo replied, "but not enough to see the irony." Elsewhere in the hall, whispers spread quietly. "The queen is afraid," one maid murmured to her mother. "Not here," the older woman hissed, but her voice lowered. "Yes, the rumors are true." Behind closed doors, the truth was darker still. Some claimed Carlos suffered from severe hormonal disorders. Others whispered of deformities, of infertility. A bloodline twisted too tightly upon itself, now unraveling. And still, the rituals continued. As midnight approached, the royal couple was escorted toward their chambers. This was no private moment. Though unseen, the act of consummation was governed by tradition. Watched, expected, whispered about. Everything depended on it. Carlos, pale and unsteady, was guided by his attendants. They undressed him carefully, applied perfumes, and handed him another potion, this one infused with exotic spices and rumored aphrodisiacs. He drank it without protest. In another chamber, Maria Luisa was prepared by her ladies. Her gown was removed, her hair combed and perfumed. Gentle reassurances were offered, along with quiet instructions. "Remember, Your Majesty," whispered the Duchess of Terranova. "Spain's future depends on tonight." The young queen nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. She had been raised for this duty, but nothing could have prepared her for this, or for the man she was about to share it with. Nearby, in a dimly lit chapel, Monks knelt in prayer. Among them was Father Matteo, the king's confessor. He knew Carlos's torment, the fear, the shame, the crushing pressure of expectation. "Grant him strength, O Lord," the priest whispered. "Grant him the courage to fulfill his duty." But even as he prayed, doubt crept into his thoughts. Was it truly God's will for this dynasty to continue? Or was this slow decay a warning? In his private study, the royal physician, Dr. Juan Bautista Juanini, wrote by candlelight. Unlike many at court, he had begun to question traditional beliefs. "The king's condition is neither spiritual nor caused by humors," he wrote. "It is structural, the result of repeated unions within the same blood." His ideas were radical, too far ahead of their time, but they were right. The next morning, the palace buzzed with quiet speculation. There was no official confirmation, no public inspection. But the truth spread quickly. The marriage had not been consummated, and in the silence that followed, fear began to grow. Across Europe, eyes turned toward Spain, because now the question was no longer if the dynasty would end, but when.